March 9th, 1945, 31,000 feet above the western Pacific, on the black approach to Tokyo. You feel the airplane before you see it, a vast, hollow rumble that vibrates through the soles of your boots and makes the light fittings in the pressurized cabin buzz. Frost patterned the observation windows like lace. Your breath fogs the thin glass as you press your forehead to it and stare down into a world that still thinks itself safe. Below, the coastline is a black scallop against a darker sea. Farther in, the lights of the city are small, polite pinpricks. In the waist, men knot and re-knot their gloves. The bombardier checks his bomb sight for the 10th time, and the navigator taps the gyroscope mount with a nervous rhythm. This is the Boeing B-29 Superfortress, an impossible thing in the sky, a flying city with a bark like an engine room and the reach of an ocean liner. Captain James Hollis, flight commander, thin from months of rationed sleep, crouches at the plexiglass nose. His headset picks up the clipped voice from the cockpit. Formation steady. Oxygen green. Bombs away in 30. You hear the click of radio relays, the distant clack of the remote gun sights being cycled, and the low, angry cough of Wright R3350S working at near maximum power. The B-29's supercharged radials emit a higher-pitched whistle than the older bombers. They sound younger, keener, like something with teeth. The plane's skin hums with tension and heat. Outside, the contrails are faint. Inside, the smell of heated electronics and oiled canvas mingles with the bitter, cheap coffee the men drink to keep nerves steady. At 31,000 feet, the air is thin and sharp as a blade. You wear headphones and a heavy suit, but you still feel the cold seeping through the frame. The bomber's heated plumbing thrums beneath your feet. In the forward compartment, the bombardier, Lieutenant Henry Cato, slides his oxygen mask back a notch and squints through the plexiglass. He has worked this approach in daylight simulators a dozen times, but tonight everything is different. The city below is a puzzle of dark and light, and they are the answer key. When the B-29 first arrived in the Pacific, Japanese pilots and air commanders treated it like any other heavy bomber, big, slow, and on paper, vulnerable. In brief radio chatter intercepted in the months before, a young Imperial Navy pilot had joked about the new American blimps, slow, ponderous things that would be lunch for a zero on a good morning. The planes they knew could climb and turn. The B-29 climbed above them and simply stayed there. It did not fight like the old threats. It changed the rules. On the flight deck, the bombardier whispers the target code, Tokyo Central. The navigator, an unshaven man named Ortiz, cross-checks wind drift with a hand-worn slide rule. The bomber's H-2X radar, a circular humming box the crew's called Mikey, paints a ghost city on a green screen for the radio operator, an anonymous square of echo that does not care for clouds or blackout. This is what the Japanese had not expected, a bomber that could find a city through iron night and vapor. That night, in silence, the radar scope becomes a confession booth. It will tell you where the lights are and where the fuel lines run. Outside, the sky shivers with the tiny pinpricks of other B-29s, a ragged constellation of super fortresses, each one a small metropolis with remote-controlled gun turrets and a crew that had learned to live in metal. The B-29's pressurized cabin lets them ride at altitudes unreachable to most Japanese fighters. They float above the effective ceiling of many interceptors. The plane's remote turrets a marvel, electromechanical ghosts that could track targets by periscope and computing mechanism, made traditional attacks awkward. Pilots who tried to come up through the sun found nothing but a field of glass, guns that did not swing like those on older bombers, but answered with an electrical precision. For the men inside, there is a quiet, ritualized readiness. The bombardier's gloved hand rests on the Norton, and then LeMay's orders had turned their art away from precision and toward frenzy. toward incendiary patterns that would turn a tidy industrial ward into a single, hungry fire. You hear the hush as the formation slips into its assigned lane, that breath where the whole bomber becomes a single organism waiting to exhale a rain of metal. The city below is still a toy, and it does not yet know the scale of what is coming. In the Japanese cockpit, months before, the sight of a superfortress had drawn laughter at mess halls and boarding houses. It looked like a behemoth, a lumbering attempt at intimidation that could not possibly outfly a Zero or outfight a kamikaze in close. But the laughter came from pilots who had not seen the superfortress at night, who had not felt the weight of reaching 30,000 feet where their small fighters could not follow, and who had not yet been forced to fight a war with a new set of rules. Tonight will change that. On the nose glass, the lights of Tokyo begin to thicken, a dense, trembling web. The men in the superfortress exchange glances without trading words. Someone in the waist mutters a prayer, others check their straps. Captain Hollis sets his jaw, watches the radar operator's eyes cut left, then right. The bomber settles into the approach like a great bird folding its wings. 10 minutes to target. The city breathes. The men breathe with it. The countdown came not with a shout, but a murmur. Bomb bay doors open. The hydraulic whine rolled through the fuselage, a deep groan that felt like the bomber's spine cracking open. The air temperature inside the compartment plummeted. At that moment, every man aboard could smell Tokyo before they saw it. The faint, sour scent of burning oil carried up from the city's industrial sectors, where earlier formations had already begun their run. From the bombardier's window, Tokyo looked deceptively calm. A faint mist floated above the Sumida River. The faint yellow lights of trains flickered through the dark, moving as if the world beneath them was still at peace. Then the first formation ahead began to drop. Long silver cylinders tumbling lazily in slow motion, each packed with jellied gasoline and magnesium. Captain Hollis didn't look down at first. He listened. The bombs fell for nearly 30 seconds, long enough for your thoughts to wander, long enough for guilt to sneak in. Then when the first ones hit, the night below turned from black to orange, as if the ocean itself had caught fire. The entire crew felt the heat reach up through the stratosphere like a hand. "Good hits," Ortiz whispered. No one replied. The B-29 banked gently, its giant wings slicing the moonlight. Behind it, others followed in perfect, mechanical rhythm. Waves of bombers marching on invisible rails. Each run drew a line of flame through the city grid. Wooden houses, paper walls, and factory roofs turned into kindling. In minutes, entire districts were burning, the firestorms joining into a single swirling inferno that clawed at the sky. The air above Tokyo began to shimmer. Clouds formed where none had existed before, created by the heat of hundreds of thousands of burning homes. The Japanese pilots had laughed at this machine once, but tonight their laughter died in the smoke. On the ground, air raid sirens wailed until the speakers melted. Civilians sprinted through alleys as walls collapsed in showers of sparks. The heat was so intense that it stripped oxygen from the air. Entire families dove into canals and rivers to escape the fire, only for the water itself to begin boiling. The firestorm generated its own wind, pulling everything toward the center. Rooftops, debris, people. From 31,000 feet, it looked like the city was breathing, inhaling flame, exhaling smoke. In the nose compartment, the bombardier tried not to look too long. He kept his eyes fixed on his instruments, as if refusing to acknowledge what the world below had become. "All bombs away," he called, voice trembling just enough to betray the weight of it. Captain Hollis gave a small nod. They were just one of hundreds. The mission was efficient, mathematical. Each target marked, burned, and crossed off. But efficiency didn't stop the human sound. Over the interphone, one of the waist gunners whispered, "Jesus, We lit the whole world on fire. No one answered. Outside, the B-29 formation continued its perfect ballet. From a distance, their silver bodies reflected the glow of the inferno below, giving them a ghostly radiance. To the Japanese anti-aircraft gunners, it looked like the sky itself had turned into a constellation of steel giants. They fired anyway, but the shells burst too low, too slow. The superfortresses were flying higher than any of their guns could reach effectively. The Zeros scrambled to intercept, but their climb rate failed them. Their engines sputtered and gasped in thin air. Those who managed to reach the bombers found their tracers bending in futility as the B-29s cruised serenely beyond their grasp. Inside the lead bomber, Captain Hollis watched one Zero make a desperate dive toward the formation. Its pilot, a young man, likely no older than 20, managed to line up for a brief attack run. The B-29's upper remote turret swiveled instantly. No manual crank, no delay, and a burst of .50 caliber rounds cut through the night. The Zero disintegrated in a flash. Its wreckage tumbled downward, swallowed by the same fire, consuming the city it had tried to defend. The airmen aboard said nothing. Some closed their eyes, others turned to their gauges, checking fuel and altitude. War had become mechanical, a set of numbers, switches, and coordinates. But in the orange reflection across their faces, each man knew he was witnessing something no bomb sight or radar could quantify. As dawn approached, the formation turned east toward the Pacific. The fires below were visible even from 100 miles out, a pulsing glow that refused to die. The B-29s flew back into silence, engines humming in hypnotic synchrony. When they landed hours later at Tinian Island, ground crews would look up at their soot-blackened bellies and cheer. To the men inside, there would be no cheering. They had seen what modern war looked like when distance met destruction. That morning, Japanese Air Command received fragmented reports. An entire capital city gone in a single night. Some officers refused to believe it. "It's impossible," one major said. "No bomber can reach Tokyo and return." But the radio static told the truth. The impossible had already happened. And across Japan's bases, pilots who had once laughed at the B-29 fell into silence, staring at the red sunrise bleeding through the smoke. They had underestimated not just an aircraft, but an era. By sunrise, the smoke from Tokyo had risen 30,000 feet, high enough that returning B-29 crews could still see it as they approached their island bases. It looked like a volcanic eruption swallowing the horizon. Even from that distance, the smell of burning wood and oil hung faintly in the air vents. The ground crews waiting at Tinian and Saipan watched in stunned silence as the silver bombers descended one by one, their engines coughing from the long haul. The crews stepped out, dazed, faces blackened with soot. No one spoke. There was nothing to say. They had just erased a city larger than Berlin. At the Japanese airfields north of Tokyo, the mood was disbelief. The night before, radar operators had tracked blips approaching the mainland, but reports were inconsistent, scattered. Many thought it was another small-scale raid, maybe a dozen bombers at most. When word spread that hundreds of superfortresses had crossed the archipelago unchallenged, and worse, that most of the interceptors hadn't even reached altitude, the shock ran like a current through every command post. Major Saburo Sakai, one of Japan's surviving ace pilots, would later recall standing on the tarmac, staring up into a sky still grey with ash. "We had mocked those bombers," he said. "We believed they were too big, too heavy, too proud." That morning, we saw what pride costs. The Zero, once the terror of the Pacific, had met its match, not in dogfights, but in physics. The B-29 cruised above 30,000 feet, higher than the Zero's carbureted engine could sustain without sputtering. Its turrets were powered, its guns guided by analog computers. A Japanese pilot could barely reach the bombers before his engine froze. his guns jammed, or his canopy iced over. The superfortress had turned the sky itself into its shield. Down below, Tokyo was unrecognizable. Wind still howled through what had been the Asakusa district, a furnace of rubble and twisted tram lines. Firefighters wandered like ghosts, dragging blackened hoses across streets that no longer existed. Survivors stumbled toward canals, their hair singed white from the heat. The water shimmered with oil, ash, and the reflection of a sun that looked wrong, pale and distant behind a curtain of smoke. The Imperial General Staff convened that same morning in a bunker beneath the Army Ministry building. Generals stood over maps that no longer meant anything. The reports from ward offices came in waves. 16 square miles burned, over 100,000 dead, 1 million homeless. "This cannot be accurate," one officer muttered, but the smell outside their bunker said otherwise. It was the scent of defeat. Yet even then, pride demanded a response. Orders went out for increased air patrols, for every remaining fighter to intercept the flying fortresses at any cost. Mechanics worked through nights without sleep, trying to squeeze one more sortie out of exhausted airframes. Pilots were briefed on new tactics, head-on attacks, kamikaze dives, anything to close the distance before the next wave arrived. But against a bomber that could fly beyond reach, it was like throwing spears at thunderclouds. Weeks later, when the B-29s returned, this time over Nagoya, Osaka, Kobe, the results were the same. Cities burned, factories vanished, and Japan's war production collapsed into ash. Each mission was more devastating than the last. To the air crews of the Superfortress, it was grim routine. Take off from Saipan, climb to 30,000 feet, watch the earth catch fire, and return home through silence. But even among them, there was unease. The B-29 had become more than a bomber. It was a symbol of the new face of war, impersonal, untouchable, absolute. Some pilots said it felt less like flying a plane and more like operating a god's hand. They never saw the faces below, only the glow. For all its mechanical perfection, the Superfortress had made the distance between man and consequence wider than ever before. By summer, Japan's skies belonged entirely to the Americans. The B-29s roamed unchallenged. The final act came in August, the most famous missions of all, when two specially modified superfortresses, Enola Gay and Boxcar, carried weapons unlike anything the world had ever seen. Hiroshima, Nagasaki. The war that had begun with laughter at a too-heavy bomber ended with a silence that stretched across history. In the aftermath, surviving Japanese pilots wrote in their diaries not of hatred, but disbelief. Disbelief that a single aircraft design, once mocked as impractical, had rewritten the rules of modern warfare. The B-29 was no longer a target or a threat. It was the messenger of a new age, an age where distance, altitude, and technology decided victory long before courage ever reached the sky. Years later, Captain James Hollis would stand in a Kansas Air Museum beside one of the last intact superfortresses. Its aluminum skin was polished and bright, its gun turrets frozen mid-aim. He'd run his hand along the fuselage and whisper to a younger mechanic, "We used to think this thing was invincible." Then, after a pause, he'd add, "Turns out it was humanity that wasn't." Above him, the vast bomber loomed, silent, cold, immaculate, a relic of the night when laughter in Tokyo turned to fire.